January 17th, 1945, Luxembourg, the Ardennes Forest. The frozen earth crunches beneath Wehrmacht boots as SS Obersturmbannführer Klaus Hoffmann raises his field glasses to the ridgeline 3 kilometers distant. Through the morning fog rolling across the Belgian frontier, he sees them, Sherman tanks, dozens of them, arranged in defensive positions along the tree line. The rumble of their idling engines carries across the valley, a mechanical growl that vibrates through the frost-hardened ground. Artillery pieces gleam dully in the weak winter sun. Troop encampments sprawl behind hastily erected camouflage netting, and the distant figures of American soldiers move with purposeful efficiency between supply trucks lined up like iron sentinels. Hoffman lowers the glasses and turns to his radio operator, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. "Confirm Allied armor strength to division command," he says, his voice tight with concern. "Minimum 2 battalions, heavy guns. They're preparing a counteroffensive." What Hoffman could not know, what none of the German high command scattered across their command posts from Luxembourg to the Rhine could possibly comprehend, was that he was staring at ghosts. Those tanks were inflatable rubber. Those artillery pieces were painted wood and canvas stretched over scaffolding. The encampments housed not battalions, but a handful of engineers operating phonographs that broadcast pre-recorded engine sounds through massive amplifiers. The American soldiers he glimpsed were actors in costume, performing coordinated movements designed to simulate an entire division. He was witnessing the greatest theatrical production in military history, a deception so complete that it would alter the final calculus of the European war. This was the Ghost Army. And by the time German intelligence officers began piecing together what had actually happened, the truth would seem so impossible, so audaciously American in its theatrical absurdity, that some would refuse to believe it even after the war ended. The architecture of impossible deception. To understand the magnitude of what transpired in the forests and fields of Western Europe between June 1944 and March 1945, one must first grasp the fundamental philosophy that separated American military thinking from the rigid doctrines of the Wehrmacht. The German military machine, for all its tactical innovation and operational daring, remained bound to a Prussian tradition that valued strength through force, victory through superior firepower, and disciplined maneuver. Deception, while occasionally employed, was considered a supplementary tool, useful but subordinate to the main effort of concentrated military power. The Americans approached warfare differently. Born from a democratic culture that celebrated creativity, improvisation, and the blurring of lines between high art and practical application, American military planners in 1943 conceived of something the German General Staff would have dismissed as frivolous. An entire military unit composed of artists, sound engineers, theatrical set designers, and special effects technicians whose sole purpose was not to fight, but to deceive. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was activated in January 1944 at Camp Forest, Tennessee. Its roster read like the faculty directory of an avant-garde art school transplanted into olive-drab uniforms. Fashion designer Bill Blass, who would later dress American First Ladies, served as a sergeant specializing in camouflage patterns. Ellsworth Kelly, destined to become one of America's most celebrated abstract painters, operated alongside sculptor Art Kane and illustrator Art Seiden. These were men who understood light, shadow, perspective, and the fundamental principles of making audiences see what was not actually there. The Army had, in effect, conscripted Broadway and Greenwich Village to wage a different kind of war. Their equipment was equally unprecedented. The 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion manufactured inflatable tanks, artillery pieces, trucks, and reconnaissance vehicles constructed from rubber sheets, reinforced with internal air bladders. From 10 meters away, these deceptions appeared convincingly real. From 100 meters, they were indistinguishable from genuine armor. From the 1,000-meter distance at which German reconnaissance photographed Allied positions, they were perfect replicas that fooled even the most experienced intelligence analysts. Each inflatable Sherman tank weighed approximately 90 pounds and could be deployed by 4 men in 15 minutes. A genuine M4 Sherman weighed 33 tons and required a crew of 5 to operate. The mathematical efficiency was staggering. The 3192nd Signal Service Company operated the sonic deception equipment, massive amplifier systems mounted on half-tracks that could project recorded sounds across distances of 15 miles. They possessed a library of audio recordings capturing every conceivable military operation. Tank columns moving across different terrain types, bridge construction, troop formations marching, supply operations, artillery emplacements being assembled. Sound engineers could layer these recordings to create acoustic landscapes of phantom armies numbering in the tens of thousands. German listening posts would detect the unmistakable signatures of major American deployments where, in reality, only a dozen sound engineers crouched beside their equipment in the darkness. The 406th Combat Engineers provided the physical infrastructure, fake supply dumps, dummy command posts, phony radio traffic, theatrical set pieces that completed the illusion. And binding it all together was the Signal Company's Special Programs section, radio operators who simulated the communication patterns of entire divisions, broadcasting thousands of messages daily using the proper call signs, frequencies, and encryption protocols that German signals intelligence had learned to recognize. They created electromagnetic ghosts, phantom headquarters whose radio signatures convinced enemy analysts that American divisions were positioned in places they had never entered. Between D-Day and the war's end, this collection of approximately 2,100 soldiers would conduct 20 major tactical deceptions across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. They would impersonate more than 30 different Allied divisions, simulating forces of up to 30,000 men with their inflatable equipment, recordings, and theatrical stagecraft. German intelligence files captured after the war reveal that in at least half of these operations, Wehrmacht commanders made critical tactical decisions based entirely on ghost army deceptions, redeploying actual combat divisions to counter threats that existed only in rubber, canvas, and amplified sound. The expectation, a transparent fraud. When SS intelligence officers first received reports of unusual American activity in June 1944, shortly after the Normandy landings, the initial assessment was dismissive. Wehrmacht doctrine held that successful military deception required weeks of careful preparation, sophisticated coordination across multiple command levels, and the deployment of substantial resources to create credible simulations. The Americans, freshly arrived on the continent and still consolidating their beachheads, could not possibly possess the operational sophistication to mount convincing deceptions. This was the considered judgment of intelligence staffs trained in the subtle art of maskirovka by years of Eastern Front experience, where Soviet deception operations had occasionally succeeded in misleading German reconnaissance. Moreover, German analysis of American military culture suggested that democratic armies lacked the operational security necessary for effective deception. American soldiers talked freely, wrote uncensored letters home, and came from a society that valued transparency over secrecy. The notion that such an army could maintain the compartmentalization and discipline required for strategic deception seemed implausible. When reconnaissance flights over American positions began identifying new concentrations of armor and artillery in late June 1944, German analysts assumed they were observing genuine redeployments, the straightforward movement of actual military units across the operational theater. Oberst Werner Pattberg, serving with Army Group B's intelligence staff, wrote in his operational diary on July 3, 1944, "American dispositions continue to follow predictable patterns. Their commanders telegraph their intentions through obvious concentrations of armor and supporting artillery. They lack the subtlety that years of combat against sophisticated opponents develops. We can read their planning as clearly as if we held their operational orders." This confidence was not mere arrogance. German intelligence methodology had been refined through 5 years of continental warfare. Analysts cross-referenced multiple intelligence sources. Aerial reconnaissance photographs were compared against signals intelligence intercepts, which were verified by scout reports from forward observation posts, all triangulated against assessments from prisoner interrogations. The system was designed to prevent exactly the kind of wholesale deception the Ghost Army was perpetrating, and for the first several operations, German intelligence detected no anomalies because the Ghost Army's creators understood this methodology and crafted their deceptions to satisfy every verification layer. When the Ghost Army created a phantom armored division, they did not simply inflate rubber tanks and hope German reconnaissance flights would be fooled. They established the complete electromagnetic signature of a genuine division headquarters, hundreds of radio transmissions daily following proper communication protocols. They created visual evidence that would satisfy aerial photography analysis, positioning their inflatable equipment in tactically sound locations that matched how genuine American commanders would deploy armor. They generated the acoustic signature of tank operations that would register on German sound-ranging equipment. And crucially, they ensured that German scouts observing from concealed positions would glimpse just enough activity, soldiers in appropriate uniforms, vehicles moving with correct frequency to confirm what the radio intercepts and reconnaissance photos suggested. The deception succeeded not because it fooled one sense or one intelligence-gathering method, but because it simultaneously satisfied every verification protocol German intelligence employed. The Ghost Army's creators had studied their enemy's analytical process and constructed deceptions that would survive rigorous cross-checking. They built lies that told consistent stories across multiple sensory and technical domains. German expectations of American military behavior also worked in the Ghost Army's favor. Wehrmacht intelligence had concluded that American operations followed certain predictable patterns. They concentrated overwhelming force before attacking. They relied heavily on artillery preparation. They favored direct approaches over subtle maneuver. When Ghost Army operations created signatures consistent with these patterns, German analysts saw confirmation of what they already believed about American military doctrine. The deceptions succeeded partially because they matched German preconceptions about how Americans waged war. The reality, confronting the impossible. The first hairline fractures in German confidence appeared not through intelligence analysis but through the random chaos of combat itself. On August 2, 1944, near Brest, a Wehrmacht reconnaissance patrol probing American positions stumbled upon one of the Ghost Army's deployments. Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Krebs led 8 men through pre-dawn darkness toward what aerial reconnaissance had identified as an American artillery battery. Their mission was to observe enemy strength and, if possible, capture a prisoner for interrogation. What they discovered instead shattered fundamental assumptions about warfare itself. Krebs's report, recovered from German archives after the war, conveys his disorientation. We approached to within 50 meters of the artillery position under cover of darkness. No sentries challenged us. Unusual, but not unprecedented given American security lapses. At dawn, I observed the position through binoculars. The guns appeared authentic, but as light improved, I noticed absence of normal activity. No crew servicing the weapons, no ammunition stocks visible. I ordered closer reconnaissance. At 20 meters, Gefreiter Schmidt reported the guns were constructed from painted wood and canvas. I confirmed this personally. The entire battery, 6 155mm howitzers, was theater scenery. We discovered inflatable vehicles nearby, some partially deflated. The entire encampment was fraudulent. Krebs withdrew and reported his findings to battalion command. His report was flagged as questionable. Intelligence staff at division level noted that the position Krebs had investigated corresponded to radio intercepts indicating active artillery operations. American radio traffic had been broadcasting fire missions and ammunition requests from that location for 3 days. Aerial reconnaissance showed vehicle tracks and signs of regular activity. The discrepancy could not be easily explained. Division intelligence concluded that Krebs had likely stumbled upon a training area or abandoned position while the actual artillery battery operated from a nearby location. This became the standard German response when isolated incidents revealed Ghost Army deceptions. Localized confusion was rationalized as misidentification rather than evidence of systematic deception. The German intelligence apparatus, like all bureaucratic organizations, possessed tremendous inertia. Anomalous reports that contradicted the established analytical framework were more easily dismissed than accepted, especially when acceptance would require acknowledging that the enemy had achieved something theoretically impossible. But the incidents accumulated. A Wehrmacht signals unit near Thionville intercepted American radio traffic indicating a major armor concentration in their sector. 3 days later, a tank battalion attacked from an entirely different location while the supposed armor concentration vanished without trace. Luftwaffe reconnaissance photographed an American supply depot covering 3 square kilometers. Subsequent artillery fire against the position revealed it was largely empty, the massive supply stacks being painted canvas sheets stretched over wooden frames. German artillery forward observers reported receiving no counter-battery fire after shelling American gun positions that signals intelligence confirmed were actively communicating with divisional command. By September 1944, a disturbing picture was emerging in Wehrmacht intelligence summaries, visible between the lines of confident assessments. References appeared to irregular American dispositions and unconfirmed armor sightings. Intelligence officers began qualifying their reports with unusual hedging language, apparent American concentration rather than confirmed positions, possible armor deployment instead of identified divisions. The certainty that had characterized German intelligence analysis was eroding, replaced by gnawing doubt about what they were actually observing. The psychological impact on German tactical commanders was corrosive. Field-grade officers planning operations now had to consider that American strength estimates might be wildly inflated, or that genuine threats might lurk where intelligence reported nothing. The fundamental transaction of military intelligence, gathering information to reduce battlefield uncertainty, was breaking down. German commanders increasingly could not trust their own reconnaissance and had no alternative methodology for penetrating the fog of war. The voices of disbelief. The Ghost Army's most profound effects manifested not on battlefields, but in the headquarters and command posts, where German officers struggled to comprehend an enemy who fought as much with theater and illusion as with steel and explosives. The captured documents, diaries, and post-war interrogations of Wehrmacht and SS officers reveal men whose confidence in their professional judgment was systematically dismantled by an adversary who refused to behave according to the established rules of warfare. General Major Rudolf von Gersdorf, Chief Intelligence Officer for the Wehrmacht's 7th Army defending Normandy and later the Alsace region, wrote in his post-war memoir, "We had grown accustomed to Soviet maskirovka. The Russians were masters of concealment and could hide entire armies in terrain we believed thoroughly reconnoitered. But the Americans achieved something more disturbing. They did not hide their forces. They manufactured them from nothing. They created armies that existed only in our intelligence reports and in the minds of our commanders. By autumn 1944, I no longer had confidence in my own assessments. How does one provide intelligence guidance when the enemy's fundamental method is to make you see what is not there?" Von Gersdorf's crisis was not unique. Intelligence officers across the Western Front found themselves trapped in an epistemological nightmare. If American dispositions could be entirely fabricated, how could one distinguish genuine threats from theatrical performances? The Ghost Army had not simply deceived German intelligence on specific occasions. They had poisoned the entire intelligence process, injecting doubt into every assessment and conclusion. SS Brigade Führer Fritz Kramer, Chief of Staff to the 6th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, was interrogated extensively by American intelligence officers after his capture. The transcript, declassified in 1996, records his bitter assessment. "You must understand that we planned our offensive breakthrough in the Ardennes based partially on our understanding of where American forces were not concentrated. We identified weak points in your lines where divisions were thinly spread. After the war, I learned that some of those weak points where we expected minimal resistance were actually protected by your strongest formations, while areas we avoided due to apparent American strength were guarded by your inflatable rubber and broadcast sound effects. We attacked into your strength because your deception made us believe it was your weakness. You did not defeat us with superior force. You defeated us by making us defeat ourselves through flawed planning based on poisoned intelligence. Kramer's realization spoke to the Ghost Army's strategic achievement. They had inverted the entire intelligence equation. Traditional deception aims to conceal strength or disguise intention. The Ghost Army achieved something more sophisticated. They made German commanders doubt their ability to perceive reality accurately, forcing them to second-guess even accurate intelligence. A Wehrmacht general planning an operation now had to consider that what appeared to be a genuine American weakness might be an elaborate trap, while an apparent concentration of enemy strength might be inflatable rubber and pre-recorded sound effects. The psychological burden of this uncertainty was immense. Perhaps the most revealing testimony came from Oberst Friedrich von der Heydte, a Luftwaffe paratroop commander with extensive intelligence training. Interrogated by American officers in June 1945, von der Heydte described the moment his faith in German intelligence methodology shattered. I was shown reconnaissance photographs of American positions in Luxembourg, massive concentrations of armor and artillery, clearly visible in proper tactical deployment. I was shown the radio intercept logs documenting 3 days of communication traffic from these positions, including routine maintenance reports and supply requests that matched the operational patterns of a genuine armored division. I was shown reports from scout teams that had observed the positions from concealed observation posts. Every verification layer confirmed the intelligence assessment. Then I was informed the entire American division was theatrical scenery assembled in 6 hours by approximately 50 men. At that moment, I understood we were no longer fighting a conventional war. We were fighting an enemy who understood that perception is more powerful than reality, and who possessed the technical sophistication to manipulate our perception so completely that our own rigorous intelligence methodology became a liability. They turned our analytic thoroughness against us. The more carefully we verified their deceptions through multiple independent sources, the more certainly we were deceived, because they had crafted their illusions to satisfy every verification method we employed. Von der Heydte had identified the Ghost Army's most devastating innovation. They had not merely fooled German intelligence, they had reverse-engineered German intelligence methodology and designed deceptions specifically calibrated to exploit its verification protocols. It was not simply deception. It was meta-deception, a systematic campaign to compromise the enemy's ability to distinguish truth from fiction by making fiction appear more thoroughly documented and verified than truth itself. The symbolism of American abundance. One object appeared repeatedly in German accounts of encounters with Ghost Army operations, an object so mundane that its symbolic weight only becomes apparent through repetition: the spare tire. Wehrmacht reports from multiple engagements describe finding abandoned inflatable tanks still equipped with authentic-looking rubber tires, wooden artillery pieces mounted on real pneumatic wheels, dummy supply trucks featuring genuine treads carefully positioned to leave convincing tracks in mud and snow. The Ghost Army's creators understood that deception lives in the details, and they equipped their theatrical props with real components where it mattered most for the illusion. But those tires represented something deeper than mere attention to realistic detail. Each inflatable tank in the Ghost Army's inventory required multiple genuine rubber components: inflation valves, reinforcement patches, authentic-looking tracks made from real rubber compound. Each sonic deception half-track ran on real tires. The support vehicles that transported and deployed the inflatable equipment rolled on pneumatic wheels manufactured from genuine rubber. The Ghost Army's deception apparatus consumed thousands of pounds of rubber, a strategic material that Germany had been unable to access in sufficient quantities since 1942, when Allied submarine campaigns cut off natural rubber supplies from Southeast Asia, and the synthetic rubber plants of the Reich struggled to meet even basic military requirements. German logistics officers reviewing captured Ghost Army equipment in 1945 calculated that the Americans had expended more rubber on a single deception unit, rubber used purely for theatrical props that would never see combat, than the entire Wehrmacht had available for tire production across all its vehicle fleets in the war's final year. One Luftwaffe quartermaster, examining a deflated dummy Sherman tank in April 1945, reported with something approaching awe. The American Theatrical Armor Unit possesses better tire quality on its fake vehicles than our actual combat tanks have seen since 1943. The spare tire became a recurring motif in German accounts because it crystallized a terrible realization. America possessed such overwhelming material abundance that it could afford to expend strategic resources on elaborate theater. The Wehrmacht fought with ersatz fuel, substitute materials, and scavenged components. The Ghost Army operated with genuine rubber, real amplifier equipment powered by properly functioning generators, fresh paint for their canvas deceptions, and enough gasoline to run sound trucks for hours simply to project recorded engine noise across empty fields. This abundance appeared most starkly in German accounts of captured Ghost Army supply caches. A Wehrmacht quartermaster unit overrunning an abandoned American position near Metz in September 1944 found stockpiles that included 3,000 gallons of paint in multiple colors for refreshing camouflage patterns on inflatable equipment, 2 complete spare sets of inflatable vehicles to replace damaged decoys, 4 backup generator systems, hundreds of replacement amplifier tubes, and enough spare radio equipment to outfit a small communications company. The Americans had equipped a deception unit with better supply redundancy than most German combat divisions enjoyed. Lieutenant Karl Rothman, examining this supply cache, wrote in his personal diary, "They provision their theater troop better than we supply our fighting men. What manner of enemy is this, who can afford such extravagance for purposes of mere deception? We salvage every cartridge, hoard every liter of fuel, and patch our vehicles with scavenged parts. They discard more in waste and theatrical props than we possess for actual warfare. This is not a war between armies anymore. It is a contest between an industrial civilization that operates without scarcity and a nation that survives on scarcity's edge. We cannot win such a contest no matter how bravely we fight." Rothman had articulated what many German soldiers came to understand through encounters with Ghost Army operations. The deception unit was itself a demonstration of American material superiority. The fact that America could afford to create an entire military formation whose purpose was not combat but theatrical illusion, and could equip that formation with better resources than most German combat units possessed, communicated more powerfully than any propaganda the vast gulf in industrial capacity between the Third Reich and the United States. The spare tire, that simple rubber circle, became a symbol of everything the Ghost Army represented. It was a component manufactured from strategic materials, allocated not to combat necessity, but to elaborate deception, provided in such abundance that supply officers equipped even fake vehicles with genuine wheels. It represented American industrial capacity, logistical sophistication, and the operational philosophy that success in modern warfare depended less on traditional military virtues than on the ability to overwhelm opponents through sheer material superiority deployed in unconventional ways. The transformation, a shattered worldview. By March 1945, as Allied armies crossed the Rhine and began the final invasion of Germany itself, Wehrmacht intelligence officers had been forced to reconsider fundamental assumptions about warfare, deception, and the nature of their enemy. The transformation in German military thinking can be traced through the evolution of intelligence summaries and operational orders captured from various commands during the final weeks of fighting. In September 1944, intelligence assessments still carried the confident tone of professional military analysis. American forces continue standard operational patterns. Enemy strength estimated at. By December 1944, during the Ardennes offensive, that confidence had eroded to cautious qualification. Reported American dispositions suggest intelligence indicates possible. By March 1945, German situation reports reflected almost existential uncertainty. American strength unknown, enemy capabilities unclear. Recommend extreme caution regarding all intelligence assessments. The Ghost Army had achieved what no amount of conventional military success could accomplish. They had convinced a significant portion of the Wehrmacht's officer corps that the German intelligence system had been comprehensively compromised. German commanders operating on the Western Front in 1945 increasingly made tactical decisions based on worst-case assumptions rather than intelligence estimates, because they no longer trusted their ability to perceive American dispositions accurately. The psychological impact was devastating. Military operations require commanders to make decisions under uncertainty, but those decisions depend on having some reliable baseline understanding of enemy strength and disposition. The Ghost Army had erased that baseline, leaving German commanders to operate in a fog of uncertainty so thick that even accurate intelligence became suspect. General Major Siegfried Westphal, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Albert Kesselring in the war's final months, wrote after his capture, "The Americans had achieved something I did not believe possible in modern warfare. They made us unable to trust our own eyes and ears. When reconnaissance reported enemy positions, we questioned whether those positions were genuine or theatrical. When radio intercepts suggested American operational planning, we wondered whether the communications were authentic or deliberately broadcast to mislead us. This pervasive doubt paralyzed decision-making at critical moments. Commanders hesitated when they should have acted decisively, or they committed forces against phantoms while genuine American threats developed elsewhere. The psychological burden of not knowing whether one's intelligence was accurate or deliberately false was perhaps more damaging than losing actual engagements. Post-war interrogations revealed that some German officers had developed elaborate theories attempting to explain how the Ghost Army operated. Several intelligence officers speculated that the Americans employed thousands of soldiers in their deception operations. Their actual number was closer to 1,100. Others theorized that advanced technologies, possibly radar spoofing equipment or sophisticated radio manipulation devices, created the illusion of phantom divisions. Few could accept the simpler truth that inflatable rubber, painted canvas, pre-recorded sound effects, and a few hundred artists and engineers could deceive an intelligence apparatus they had believed sophisticated enough to penetrate any enemy stratagem. The transformation ran deeper than operational confusion. German officers who encountered evidence of Ghost Army operations described experiencing a fundamental disorientation about the nature of American military culture. The Wehrmacht understood enemies who fought with fanatic determination like the Soviets, or with methodical professionalism like the British. The Americans presented something different, an enemy who approached warfare as a problem, amenable to creative solutions, who deployed artists and sound engineers as military assets, who invested substantial resources in elaborate deceptions that mixed theatrical technique with military objectives. Oberst Hans von Luck, a decorated panzer commander who fought against Ghost Army operations in France, explained in his memoir, "We Germans approached warfare as a serious, deadly profession requiring discipline, courage, and tactical acumen. The Americans treated it as, I struggle to find the word, as improvisation. They employed artists to paint fake artillery pieces. They used jazz musicians as sound engineers to project recorded tank noises. They inflated rubber balloons into tank simulacra. And these absurdities worked. They worked brilliantly. This revealed something about the American character that we had not understood. They did not see a contradiction between seriousness and creativity, between military discipline and artistic improvisation. They could be simultaneously professional soldiers and theatrical performers. This flexibility, this refusal to stay within established categories, gave them advantages we could not counter because our military culture did not contain the conceptual vocabulary to even comprehend what they were doing until after they had done it. Von Luck had identified the Ghost Army's deepest significance. They represented a fundamentally different military philosophy, one that emerged from democratic culture's comfort with boundary crossing, its validation of artistic creativity as a practical skill, and its pragmatic willingness to employ unconventional methods if they achieved results. The Ghost Army was possible because American military culture could conceive of artists as soldiers, theater as warfare, and deception as a legitimate combat method worthy of substantial investment. This conceptual flexibility was itself a strategic advantage. Epilogue: The Art of Inevitable Victory. In the spring of 1946, military intelligence officers from the defeated Wehrmacht's intelligence staff gathered in interrogation rooms across the American occupation zones, reviewing documents related to Ghost Army operations that had deceived them so completely. They examined reconnaissance photographs showing positions they had believed genuine, but which were revealed as inflatable rubber. They listened to recordings of the audio broadcasts they had interpreted as actual armor movements. They studied the radio intercept logs that had convinced them American divisions were positioned in locations they had never entered. One Oberst, reviewing a technical manual explaining how the Ghost Army inflated and positioned dummy Sherman tanks, reportedly laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, without humor. "We were defeated by art students with balloons and phonographs," he said. "Not by superior tactics or overwhelming firepower, though you had both, but by theater, by illusion, by artists making us see what was not there." His assessment, while emotionally raw, missed the deeper truth. The Ghost Army succeeded not because German intelligence was incompetent. It was highly professional and methodologically rigorous. They succeeded because American industrial capacity could afford to expend strategic materials on theatrical deception. They succeeded because American military culture valued creative problem-solving enough to conscript artists and equip them with military resources. They succeeded because democratic society had produced soldiers comfortable with boundary crossing between artistic practice and military objectives. The Ghost Army was not an isolated cleverness. It was the inevitable expression of American civilization applied to warfare. The spare tires on those inflatable tanks, the gallons of paint refreshing canvas artillery pieces, the generators powering sound equipment broadcasting recorded engine noise, these represented more than tactical deception. They demonstrated that America had achieved such material abundance that it could afford extravagance in pursuit of military objectives, that its industrial base generated such surplus that equipping a theatrical deception unit with better resources than most German combat divisions possessed was strategically feasible. The Ghost Army's 20 major operations across Western Europe helped alter the calculus of specific battles. During Operation Viersen, they simulated an entire army near the Dutch border, drawing German reserves away from the actual Rhine crossing further south. During the Brittany campaign, they convinced German forces that American strength remained concentrated around Brest, while actual divisions repositioned for the eastward advance. At the Maginot Line, their phantom formations held German attention for days, while Allied forces maneuvered into positions for breakthrough operations. Military historians estimate that Ghost Army deceptions drew German divisions away from critical sectors on at least 6 occasions, potentially saving thousands of Allied casualties. But their deeper achievement was psychological and philosophical. They forced Wehrmacht intelligence to doubt its own methodology. They demonstrated that American military culture could deploy unconventional capabilities that emerged from democratic society's validation of creativity as a practical skill. They showed that modern industrial warfare increasingly belonged to nations that could not only produce superior quantities of conventional weapons, but could also innovate conceptual approaches that opponents lacked the cultural vocabulary to anticipate. When Klaus Hoffmann, that SS officer who had observed phantom American armor through his field glasses in January 1945, was interviewed by American military historians in 1952, he recalled the moment differently. "I believed I was watching an army preparing for combat. I was actually watching a performance, a piece of military theater staged for an audience of Wehrmacht intelligence officers. The Americans had turned warfare into art, or perhaps art into warfare. I am still not certain which. What I am certain of is that by the time we understood what they had actually done, the war was already lost. Perhaps it was lost the moment they conceived of such a unit and allocated resources to create it, because that demonstrated an operational imagination and material abundance we could not match." The Ghost Army was disbanded in September 1945. Its soldiers returned to civilian life and largely remained silent about their wartime service for decades. Their operations stayed classified until 1996. Bill Blass returned to fashion design. Ellsworth Kelly resumed his artistic career. The sound engineers went back to recording studios and radio stations. They had spent the war making the impossible appear real and the real appear impossible, and they had helped win that war not through violence but through perception, not through destruction but through creation. In the end, the Ghost Army's legacy transcends tactical deception. They demonstrated that modern warfare rewards not just traditional military virtues, but also creativity, innovation, and the willingness to approach problems through unconventional methods. They showed that artists could be warriors, and warriors could be artists when operational necessity demanded. They proved that abundance itself could be weaponized, that the capacity to expend strategic materials on elaborate theater was itself a demonstration of industrial superiority that demoralized enemies as effectively as conventional combat. The spare tire, that simple rubber circle mounted on inflatable tanks, still symbolizes this truth. It was genuine rubber allocated to fake vehicles, strategic material expended on theatrical props, abundance deployed in service of illusion. It represented an America that could afford to be extravagant in its deceptions, creative in its military applications, and willing to blur boundaries between art and warfare in pursuit of victory. The Ghost Army was perhaps the most American military unit in history, improvisational, theatrical, resource-rich, culturally flexible, and ultimately effective precisely because it refused to limit itself to conventional definitions of how wars should be fought. German intelligence officers had expected to face an enemy they understood. Instead, they confronted an adversary who rewrote the rules of engagement so thoroughly that their professional expertise became a liability, their rigorous methodology a pathway to deception, and their fundamental assumptions about warfare obsolete before they recognized the game had changed. By the time Wehrmacht commanders understood what the Ghost Army actually represented, American columns were already crossing the Rhine, rolling eastward on real tires toward an inevitable victory that had perhaps been determined not on battlefields, but in the fertile imagination of a democracy that could conceive of soldiers carrying paintbrushes instead of rifles, projecting recorded sounds instead of artillery shells, and winning through the power of perception rather than the force of arms.